Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Good morning again. We take this time and opportunity to introduce ourselves to each other. My name is Howard.
I'm Bob.
George. Carl. Robert.
Gay.
Cass. Gregory.
Todd. Dean.
Paul.
Joe.
Jack.
Jim.
Paul.
Ray.
Marv.
You.
Peter.
Clint.
Peter.
Raphael.
Nobu.
Welcome, and anyone here for the first time visiting GBF?
Yes. Buds. Can we see it?
Bud?
Yeah, buds.
Big Bud?
Yes.
Oh, yeah?
He's not here. He's not here.
He's not here today. But yeah, he comes.
And Jim.
Jim, welcome. From where? From where?
San Francisco.
Far away. You made the journey to be with us this day. Well, Kathleen, it is my privilege to welcome you this day and to introduce you to the Sangha. Kathleen is going to speak this day on freedom from a Buddhist perspective. Yeah, no. You'll let us know. Our hearts are wide open to you. Kathleen has been in and about San Francisco Zen Center for about 25 years or so, practicing both as a lay student and also as a priest. Over the years, she has found that the beginning questions of practice evolve into more refined questions that engage her whole life and that involve both her priesthood and her psychotherapy practice. So, Kathleen, it is a delight and privilege to have you with us today.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be back. I think this is my 5th or 6th lecture here. And I've always enjoyed coming and talking.
One of our perennial speakers.
I did. Well, I haven't done for a while, which is actually write this out. And that was because I had to think so much about what I was saying. I mean, I had to really think about the concepts of freedom and liberty, not only as we have them in our lives, but also as they apply. So some of this I'm going to be reading, and some of it I'm just going to be talking. And it's not always the best I know to be reading because I'm looking down, but it's more coherent, which is my main issue. So today's the day before the 4th, and I realized when I set up the date for this lecture that I was going to be lecturing right before the 4th, and I thought, as long as that was the case, why not talk about freedom? So I've been spending actually some considerable time thinking about freedoms and about this constitutional definition as freedom, the preamble, as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Then I thought a little bit about the Buddhist definition of freedom, which is non-suffering and, of course, not pursuing happiness. So life we have because of karmic tendencies. We're brought back into this life because of where it's been in our past lives. And as for liberty, this is a very strange term. It's a strange term in our time, and maybe it's always been kind of a strange term. Culturally and politically, freedom's definition is varied legally, and how it's defined. It's varied from state to state, and sometimes from national administration to national administration. In our world, liberty is a very changeable condition, and one that is a lot associated with personal actions in the public consciousness. But so often liberty seems to be attached to this phrase, "You can't tell me what to do." This is kind of a daunting phrase, and I think that it underlies a lot of unskillful action, both personally and politically. Buddhist liberty is more about the freedom to choose what's in our best spiritual interests, and those are always intimately intertwined with everybody else's spiritual interests. So here I want to interject a little note. After I'd gone so far, and I went back and I sort of reread what I did, I went to the dictionary and I looked up both freedom and liberty, which was very interesting. I don't think I did this since I was in junior high school. And both of these words have the connotation of freedom from constraint, actually, meaning unbound freedom. And there follows a long list of words in this British dictionary, which I use, in which the term free means actually acting outside the law. Let's see, free love, freeloading, freebies, the unrestrained enjoyment of one's natural rights. Now, I don't know, what they mean by natural rights, although I'm sure there's a legal definition of it. But this is a very, very interesting way to put it. Right? And what do we call it when people act too freely? And how do we have the inner knowledge that that's occurring? Because we do. Just as a common thing, and when I consider my own experience, it makes me alert and somewhat anxious when I perceive the boundaries are being broken. And when someone else feels free to impinge on others, which is often how freedom is taken, bad things often happen. And right now I'm thinking about driving down the freeway, watching somebody cut in, cut out, and drive really fast, and not pay very much attention to what's going on. They just want to go. They want to get to where they want to go as fast as they can. This is a very concrete example, and of course there are interpersonal ones too. There's a person who, gets mad and dumps their anger all over you. And this is another kind of impingement. So freedom is kind of a double-edged word in lots of ways. To be at liberty, what does that mean? Often we think of this, as I said, in the political sense, that we have certain constitutional rights. The right to gather, like we're doing now, freedom of religion, the right to bear arms, freedom of the press, and so forth, the Bill of Rights. Well, we kind of take these for granted, in a sense, in this country, although maybe not so much lately. However, here's another question. Does external liberty equate to internal liberty? Practicing Buddhists have to consider the nature of freedom, because in our hearts and bodies, this is the state that we long for. We want very much to be free, not to hurt. And this is Buddhist premise, that there is, with practice, freedom from suffering. Nevertheless, we are at times far from considering our best spiritual interests. Often we're mentally roaming around in what we would like to happen, thinking of nice things that have happened, or wondering, will we be at liberty to pursue the nice things we want to occur? I don't think this is something we need to be ashamed of especially, but we need to notice it. We also need to notice the negative times when we turn away from the things that are happening that greatly upset us. There's a place of fear that is often not acknowledged. Fears that we won't get what we want, fears that something dreadful will happen. I think of these fears as the real mental terrorists. Fear of something is usually its worst suffering. Most of the time we are not noticing these things because we're in them. And when we're in them, when we're in fantasies of forthcoming events, we're mentally living them in advance. And we're in the other side of this, which is fear and defenses. These are all absorbing when they come. It's hard to get enough distance at first to see how and why we suffer in our minds. And when we do get a little distance, maybe the whole thing is kind of overwhelming. The first time you recognize how much you're suffering. It's very easy to panic and run away because the organism sort of automatically withdraws some pain. And it's very easy to check this out. Just light a match and hold it to your finger and see what happens. That's what we do internally. How not to suffer? This is the question. How to address the suffering around you? This is the next question. How to incorporate the answers into your practice in your life, take them inside themselves, and show them in your action and speech. This is the third question. These questions are a big part of Zen and Buddhism generally. Sometimes I hear that Zen is a purely meditational practice. This is not true. Practice begins with some desire to wake up. At first it might be around getting enlightened. I actually started like this. I wanted a big experience. I was so hot on the big experience that I was looking for that I ignored all the vital supports that promote steadiness, goodwill, and insight into unskilled actions. I had to learn to arouse bodhicitta, which is not only the desire for freedom, but the desire for everyone else's freedom too. Which is not only a spiritual desire, but also very important, a training in humility. In any case, you must start where you are, because your mind is the field from which good and bad spring. The mind is never empty. It's your practice and your dedication that determine the outcome. When I began to meditate, that was all I did. I didn't have any intent or sense of the morality that actually infuses meditation. I just sat down and tried to make my mind a blank. Well, you all know how successful that is. Has everybody tried to make their mind a blank? Mine don't work like that. So 3 years later, I did Jukai, which was lay ordination. And at that point, I formally took precepts. At the time I did precepts, there wasn't any preparatory precept class. You just saw the rakusu, and then you went through a ceremony in which you formally took precepts. And from that point on, you were supposed to be practicing them. So when I took precepts, it was kind of words on paper, which I knew about because I had been a Catholic, and I certainly was familiar with the Ten Commandments. Right? And I was familiar with the concept of sin and confession and having to make it right, really, before, there was a point at which you always had to make it right, be reborn, and then go on. And that didn't fit for me anymore, which is how I converted, so to speak, to Buddhism. So a little later, after this lay ordination, I started trying to incorporate these precepts, very clumsily, but with goodwill. I consented to this because I'm a very stubborn person, and I have to be shown. But I had read what Buddha said. Don't do it because I say it. Do it because you find it works for you. This was the thing that led me to Buddhism before anything else. Don't do it because I say it. Do it because it works for you. And, I wanted to know for myself. And in fact, if I couldn't know it, I wouldn't do it. So I found out. And I think now the thing that I found out the most was that in order to have any inner freedom, I had to consciously take on restraint. And the very act of taking precepts led me to know just how willful I was in the use of body, speech, and mind. And that was really kind of a shock for me, in a way. So this is the most basic level. Just don't do these things. Don't lie, cheat, steal, kill, talk about others, defame the Dharma, screw around, deliberately make people feel bad, be covetous. I took them as rules at first, and I had the experience with rules we all have. If you want to be good, you have to follow the rules. If you're not, you're bad, or you've done something bad. In this sort of muddle of self-judgments, I didn't understand that in the larger sense, taking on the precepts conditions your body and mind. Actually. And you have a whole lot of conditioning right from the get-go of being a person, of having an ego, of knowing that this is me. You don't understand how deep that conditioning is until you run into it in meditation for the first time, and then you find I is coming up hugely, and this waterfall, what they call the waterfall of the mind, is all about me. So, stealing, for example, the precept, the first thing is that it's not what you steal. It's the act itself that actually is the habit. Taking the small, inconsequential thing has the same weight as taking the Mona Lisa. It's not the big, expensive thing. So the precept is, do not take what is not given, which covers everything you don't own personally or is available by convention, like toilet paper in the public toilet. This is conventionally available to you, so you can use it. But if you think about the number of times you take without asking, casually, from friends, just, at work, stuff like that, that's kind of a shock, really. So let's follow stealing a little more. The stealing mind is interested in what it can get for itself. It's not free from desire or attachment to what may be stolen. It's not at liberty, let's say, to consider other people except as sources of theft. So there's no freedom here. But definitely a mental habit. Our mental habits define us, and like all habits, they're really hard to break. So it was about the time that I started to refine my habits that I realized how ingrained they were. The more I recognized how my mind ran, the less free I felt. However, I did have this theory that getting enlightenment, that I could have the freeing effect without any preliminary work. So you might also think so. And let me immediately say, this is not. You can't sit on a cushion, hope for an experience, which will then change everything. This happens, but it's rare. Norman Fisher, whom you may have heard of, met a guy in Seattle, his wife had just died, and he was in such agony from this that the tumult that stirred up brought him to an experience that we would describe as one of great clarity. But he had never practiced before, and he had no idea what it was about or what to do. So he came to Norman and told him about this sorrow and grief of his wife's death, and this clarity that it had brought to him, this sort of amazing mental opening. And the first thing that Norman said to him was, now that you've had this, you have to put the underpinnings underneath it. You have to practice. You have to take on what is ethical and also correct in this practice. It can't just be boom, that's it. So for most of us, it's a brick-by-brick experience. For actions, there are consequences. And this is a really hard lesson to learn. Maybe the most common reaction, to actions is to cast blame onto others. Taking responsibility for our habits is a huge step in practice, and really our first step to freedom. Yes, there's a way you cannot let yourself know you're stealing. There's a way you can make it perfectly okay and justify everything to yourself. You can gloss over what you did. You're at liberty to do that, actually. And every time you do that, the habit root gets a little deeper. So you produce more consequences. So our thief, what does he lack? Well, he lacks generosity. He certainly doesn't practice it. But generosity is the positive action, the action that opens the heart. Of course, you can give money. You can do kind of the concrete things that are generous. But even more, you can open your heart, because the stealing habit has been overcome. And stealing and acquiring have been seen for the empty things that they are, the anxiety that there's never quite enough. And this is true of all the precepts, all the things that we do. There's some basic fear that underlies those kind of actions. And mostly here I've been speaking about the negative precepts, the ones that we vow not to do. Well, there are positive precepts also. We take them as an antidote. On one level, the positive precepts are an unconditioned vow never to commit the 10 negative precepts. However, it's not just enough to happen not to do something when you think of it. You commit to avoid that action whatever happens. If you catch yourself doing something that is unskillful, you admit it and then you refrain. I want to say this is very tough. Right now I'm thinking of the vow against harsh speech that includes gossip, name-calling, angry words. Tibetans have a practice which I think is really useful here. You take a time vow. You take a vow not to do this for a certain period of time, which can be short. It can be an hour, or it can be a month. And then you mindfully avoid it. But when I was writing this, I was thinking, this is really hard to do because everybody's so used to talking about everybody else. You know, the effect of religious practice is that it changes you. It actually changes you. It's kind of like being alcoholic. It's realizing you want to stop this addiction of alcohol and going to AA. And one of the first and the most difficult things is that you lose all your drinking buddies. All the people that you've known, that you went and drank with, that you considered your friends, are now, no longer in your group because you're not doing the same thing anymore. Right? I mean, some of you are in AA. You've probably gone through that and you know what it feels like. It's kind of a lonely feeling. And you're with this new group, you're with the Sangha, but you don't know these folks so well yet. And you don't know that they support right speech in a very deep way. And so you feel a little funny about doing it. You feel a little funny about hearing the gossip about somebody and just not responding to it. You might feel a little funny about not passing on the really good thing when you hear it. And it's hard. It's hard to do. It takes practice. That's why they call this practice, right? Because we have to practice. And then there's a place, usually, where you have some withdrawal. You really do have withdrawal. You have the desire for alcohol, and you also have the desire to go back to your group and just talk freely the way you used to talk because it feels comfortable. But that's counterproductive for us, actually. So this is the point where you think back to how it was before, or you fall back. And, in relation to speech, and many of the precepts are about speech. Matter of fact, 4 of them are about speech. That's how important speech is. That you have to see what the effect of the speech is. You have to see what the effect of the speech is. And if you've ever been in a situation where gossip has come and you passed it on, and someone has heard about it, the person who's being discussed, and who's been very hurt and upset or angry about what's gone on, then you know just how painful and harmful this can be. Or you've been the subject of gossip, and it's come back to you, and it's been really painful. That's the effect of speech. It's hard. It's also hard not to do it. So you have to remember and accept the consequences of being drunk, if you've been drinking, or of having a smart, vicious mouth, and go the whole round again. But I think the nice thing about the precepts is that you can always start again. You can always say to yourself, well, okay, I did this, and now I see what's happened, and I don't think I want to do this anymore. You might think that saying something nasty isn't as bad as being drunk, but actually I think it's sort of on the same level. I mean, what would you do with great insight if you were still having a lot of judgments? And it can happen. You can have great insight and still have judgments. We want to wake up both our minds and our hearts. And my image of the unawakened heart is something with layers of hardened callus on it. We're just kind of calloused because of what we go through in life. And, practices are kind of like the razor that shaves the callus off. And then you get to a place where you can actually feel with your skin again and feel what it's like to do these unskillful things. So as you take on restraint and become aware, there's a certain softening that happens for you. You look at yourself and how you conduct your life, and then you really begin to understand the law of karma, that your actions determine an outcome. You understand this because you're paying attention in a different way, and that affects how you act and how other people react to you. And precepts are often taught moralistically, but I don't think that's so helpful. I think it's more that it's really important to understand that the quality of the action determines the outcome. And that's what you're changing. And so when you do that, inner space opens up. And it's a space that was formerly taken up by unrestrained, very conditioned ego. So on this day, July 3rd, we come together to consider the Dharma on a 3-day weekend, in which most people are out doing other things, and how to study and practice in a way that promotes freedom. Today I've talked about the precepts as our religious Bill of Rights. We are all free. We're at perfect liberty to act as we wish. We all, so to speak, have a vote, and we can choose how to use it. We all of us, every one of us, have the innate capability to choose for ourselves a path which will, without fail, lead to liberty. Real liberty, a liberty extending beyond this conventional life. Take confidence from the depths of your heart, especially on this crucial point, the principle of cause and effect. Do as much good as possible, thinking, today I will strive my good. I will strive for good and do my best to avoid the negative. At night before you fall asleep, don't just fall off. Think about what you've done during the day. Dedicate the merit to all sentient beings. Resolve to stop negative actions. Real freedom comes with responsibilities. Opening the heart and taking on these responsibilities is the Buddhist path. May all beings be happy, and may we have real freedom throughout all the worlds. So this is the content of my lecture about freedom. Let's say a little aside, sometimes when I consider the political situation now and how much our fear is conditioned what's going on in the American consciousness, it's a place where I think it's particularly important to look to what freedom is and what we believe. There's a lot of fear, and we're as much immersed in it as anybody else who is a U.S. citizen now. And I think we can only be free from this fear. Let's see how to say this. Well, one thing I've done is that I've just stopped watching TV news because the words that they use are so... there's a repetitious crisis, and it's really kind of entered the consciousness, and then I think about what do I fear actually right at this moment, and nothing really comes up. In other words, I don't have fear of getting on planes. I don't have fear that terrorists are going to come and do something, because those things have not yet happened. But there's certainly large areas in which we think, oh my God, what if it did happen? Or what if it did? What if it did? Of course there would be, hurt and anguish and fallout. And there always is in human life. But there's also change. And I know that from time to time, matter of fact all the time, things change. So in the American consciousness, what's happening is something that's happening now, and somewhere along the line there will be a change. Buddhism says things go like this. It will either get better, it will get worse, or it will stay the same. And as this happens, these changes, what is our mental attitudes towards it? One thing I notice is that I'm getting gray in my hair a lot. And this year, when I turned 64, I had thought, I really am getting older. And it was a shock. And I've been doing this practice for a long time. Things have changed a lot for me in the course of the last 25 years. And yet, even so, right, I had this shock. So, I think I'm encouraging myself and I'm encouraging all of us when we fall into this culture of fear to take a step back and say, is it in the here and now in front of my face? And if it's not, maybe I don't have to be as scared as they tell me I have to be.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
If it's not really in my face, maybe I don't have to be as scared as they tell me I have to be.
Right.
So, I'm open to questions or comments. I am hard of hearing, so if I don't hear you, I'll say so. And I think after this, I'll just stay in this room because it will be less noisy than the outer room, which I've experienced before. Thank you.
So, Kathleen, you'd be willing to entertain some questions?
Oh, sure.
Sure. Let's do that.
Yes.
Well, just one comment is that at this time of the year I see things like liberty is not free, the price of freedom is not free, and on and on and on. These commercial lines that suggest that somehow you can buy it or sell it, and that we have to pay for it in that sense. And that's what I would expect. It's such a highly commercial culture. Related to my own practice, which has been non-duality, I increasingly am aware of the absolute perfection of everything, and I'm able to dwell into that for short periods of time, or to be regularly aware of it. And in that sense, to see that everything is exactly the way it should be, because that's the way it is. Of course, the comment that comes up is nihilism. And in San Francisco in particular, if you're not doing something about it, then somehow you're doing it wrong. Because I have found my practice so useful to me and have grown with it over a period of years, and I'm 75, so I know I don't have too many years to put up with all the bullshit on this planet. I really find that being that practice in the sense of not being anything, but of simply being witness to all of it, gives me a real sense of wonder that there's anything at all. So that's been my own personal resolution in that sense. There's nothing, there is no freedom, and there's nothing but freedom. There is no liberty, and there's nothing but liberty, because those are words and labels. So, as I say this, I see that my question is, am I alone? I just don't know too many people who agree with me, and I don't really expect an answer. But I cannot find the company of other people who seem to have the same experience in life, because I'm not doing something. Well, I am doing something. I'm getting old. I'm going to die. That's what I'm doing. So there it is. May everybody find peace and happiness. Could you answer yes or no?
Well, it sounds like it's kind of worrisome to you that you're not doing something.
There's so much suffering.
Yeah. Well, as you say, there is this paradoxical. But when what you think about is not doing anything is how you describe that to yourself. Actually, a lot is going on. And the main thing that's going on is that you're not messing with it. You're not messing with it. You're not stealing from it. You're not lying about it. You're not doing any of the things that could be construed as actually reaching in and handling and making it different. So those things are arising in you, whether you recognize it or not. That's actually going on. And that's one of the effects of practice, when you begin to see the perfection of everything as it is, then you have no desire to change it. It's our desire to make things a little different so that we don't have a sense of suffering that tends to mess things up. So I see more. Okay, use it.
Hema Chodron, in one of her texts, talks about how she undertends to joy, and I'm a codependent, even if recovering. Undertends to joy.
Undertends to joy. Thank you.
And I'm a codependent, even if recovering. So I have a fair amount of focus on relieving suffering, at least of others. But I don't attend as much to the experience of joy, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how those fit together and so forth.
Do you expect to experience joy as a feeling?
No.
Because I think that the expectation of joy may actually impede you from recognizing the settled quality of, again, not changing anything. When you get to a place of being settled, it's not necessarily that you have great sensations of joy or bliss. It's that you don't feel, in the Buddhist sense, heat. You don't feel the ambivalence of pull from thing to thing. It's a very settled condition. So again, in meditation, feelings arise, but they're very changeable things. Any state you have is going to change to something else. So the expectation of it, in a way, impedes your recognizing what's going on.
Well, I don't particularly have an expectation of it.
Yeah.
And my understanding is that there's desire and aversion and neutrality or indifference. And I hear, probably incorrectly, you saying that indifference is the highest state and that's our aspiration. Is that what you mean?
Indifferent? Oh, no. How can you be indifferent? You know, I think the thing when we sit down and we say, to sit down and immediately recognize you're Buddha is also to sit down and be fully aware of what's going on with everybody else, because they're no different from you, right? I mean, if you have suffering, how much suffering do other people have? How can you possibly be indifferent to it? The more your practice expands, the more you are concerned with and alive to and want to relieve the suffering that happens around you. Taking precepts is just the most basic level of relieving suffering that's going on around you. As you practice and as you get more expansive, that level of compassion truly begins to come in. So I wouldn't think about it as indifference at all. When we start, we practice for ourselves. On the way, somewhere along the line, we realize we're practicing for everybody. So sometimes I've watched, Discovery Health Channel, and I watch the trauma in the ER. And often I think to myself, this level of trauma, physical of course, but also emotional and everything else, goes on all the time in the whole world. And what can my response possibly be to it other than to say, may all beings be happy, may all beings be happy, may all beings be happy. And to feel that as much as I can with my whole body, my whole life. Sometimes you need to remind myself, I need to nudge myself a little bit. I mean, there's specific practices to bring suffering into mind. I would encourage you to think that your path is an expansive one, and that the joy that will come to you is in seeing and feeling that you're doing something to actually help, because you are. And that's one thing about dedication and merit. You give your merit away freely so that everybody else can be, and that's a really joyful thing to do. That's like giving all the money you have to charity. You just constantly give it away, give it away, give it away, give it away. It's wonderful. So I say this, but you can't know it unless you do it. This is like all this stuff I've been talking about. I'm not trying to be moralistic or sententious here. It really, you have to do it in order to get the benefit. So if this makes any sense to you, try giving it away, see what happens. And then,
I think you sort of answered my question.
I'm sorry?
Or you sort of answered my question.
I sort of answered
Yes,
the question. Okay.
I've one experience that I've been sort of dealing with in the past few months or even years, which has been interesting regarding freedom and the current concept of freedom with the soldiers and 4th of July and patriotism. My cousin's husband is a Marine, and he was over in Iraq several times, and it's easy. Sometimes it's easy to look at the military and the government as an other.
Yes,
and,
it is. Mm-hmm.
These bastards are over here fighting this stupid war for oil, and I hate them. But then here's my cousin's husband, who I know directly and see as a very nice guy, husband, father, just sweet as can be, and he's over there in Iraq fighting. And that's been really difficult for me to deal with, to hate the war, but not hate him, because I don't hate him. That's been difficult. Makes me think.
The war is a tough one because we've never stopped being at war. Actually, I don't think there's ever been a point in human history when there wasn't some war going on. So there's fear involved, and there's aggression involved, and oh my gosh, you're doing music.
I'm watching. You're joking.
And there's also, at least what I believe and what I've been taught, and I think is true, there's also some karma involved. So that people who are somehow involved in the war are also dealing on one level or another with karma. And I think we feel for those, for soldiers and everyone else who's in the war, the same level of compassion as we do for anybody else. I mean, it certainly never occurred to me to set them aside because they're doing something I wouldn't necessarily do. And it's not that in my life I haven't killed. I've put pets down. I've killed. I was just combing my cats the other day and killing the fleas and thinking, there has to be a more skillful way to do it. And I did figure out a more skillful way to do it. And you know what? I really never lost some trust that we can figure out a more skillful way too. But it's hard. And it's hard for us to do it individually, and it's hard for us to do it on a national level too. But my prayer is always that will happen. And that to me means that the lives lost in war will not have been in vain. Otherwise it would be really sad.
I've had the experience of having these flying dreams on occasion where I feel like this incredible sense of freedom. And then when I reflect on that back in my day-to-day life, I feel like I haven't had an experience like that as an awake, conscious person. And even at times, comparing that experience, I feel like being in a body and sort of moving through molasses in a way. And I was wondering whether you would consider that sort of a taste of what freedom means to awaken to the Buddhist sense of freedom.
Technically, in Buddhism, freedom means freedom from ego, freedom from the I sense. That was where Buddha got to. When you say you have a sense of freedom, what do you feel free of?
I felt more free too, more free to just this very expansive sense of all possibilities, or I can roam the universe if you will, that sort of feeling.
Mm-hmm. I would say that's a fruit of practice, that you are in your meditation arriving at a place where you can begin to feel actually free and not so constrained by the thoughts, maybe and habit patterns that you've had. But the experience that you've had is an experience. It will change. As you found out, you have it and then it goes away. And it is, we're cautioned, that's why we're cautioned against trying to recapture experiences that we've had. Because if you spend a lot of time dwelling on how to get it back, then you don't actually see what's going on. And real freedom is seeing what's going on in every sense. It's accepting, the negative and the really good along with the neutral. And knowing that that's what it is. That that's actually, a condition of life. The good, the bad, and the neutral. It's how we take it that really is the important thing. So I would keep going and just noticing. So much of this is mindfulness, just sticking with noticing as much as you can. And seeing the small moments when you notice freedom as well as the large, expansive moments. And keep going with that and see what happens. Sometime it may all run together in one big freedom streak. And that will be really different for you when it does.
Just one.
Yes?
This paradoxical notion of freedom is difficult to understand, except if I think of the addict or the alcoholic in recovery, who may say, yes, I'm free to have a drink, but I choose not to.
Exactly.
And in so doing, they then become free of the obsession about having a drink. And it truly is kind of paradoxical, but there is a freedom, a true freedom from this obsessive thoughts and I'm going to have the next drink and all that sort of thing just disappears.
That's right.
And yet, to the outsider, it will look like they're depriving themselves or not free. So it seems to be a very Buddhist kind of
That's, yeah. It is. That's why I drew the parallel, because it is, you think about taking on the precepts as being a very constraining thing, but in fact, in taking them on, you find a lot more freedom emotionally and psychologically than you've had before. So I agree. The paradox is only in the fact that we have to define things. If we didn't describe it, we wouldn't be worried about paradoxes. We would only say, it feels different to me not to drink. It feels different to me. I feel freer of something that's been dogging me my whole life. Even though my climate has changed and I feel a little shaky in it, I also feel free. So yeah, I agree.
Well, I wanted to share with you one story. I mean, a little bit of time, just to kind of get your feedback. I used to be a Lutheran clergyman. I was very active with the interfaith community over in the East Bay. developed a really good working relationship with the Tibetan Buddhist community in Fremont, large community. So I knew the abbot, and I knew a number of the monks there, and would support them in their celebrations and their events, and really enjoyed being related to that Sangha. And one morning I woke up, and there in the front page was this just tragic declaration that 5 of the monks had been killed on a car trip from, down to L.A. on I-5. Their van turned over, and 5 of the monks, 5 of them were killed. I was broken. I cried, and I wept, and I got on my clergy shirt, and I was going over there to just be with them in the midst of their sorrow. And I was expecting, news cameras, and I was expecting, hundreds of the Tibetan community to be there. And I got there, and life there was as if nothing had happened. I went up to the abbot. I found him. He was doing his daily routines. I went up to him. My eyes were red. My face was swollen, and I gave him a big hug, and he, I said, I'm so sorry, and he smiled and he laughed. And I was wondering, and I was so confused about that reaction. I actually have to admit that I resented the indifference of that reaction. I know that was all my shit that was centered around it, but, what was going on there?
Let's see. Well, it's Buddhist and it's cultural. It's both of those things. Okay, so the Tibetans have had Buddhism for over 1,000 years, and it's very much a part of their culture. And the Buddhist thinking about death is that it's just simply a change from one state to another. It's not necessarily something you cry and weep over, because everybody's going to die. And the whole thrust of practice is really dealing with this essential issue. Great is the issue of birth and death. What is born and what dies? That's what it says on the Han. That's what the Tibetans are working on. The Chinese Buddhists are working on. We're all working on the same thing. What is born and what dies? If we think that a real thing is born, a real substantial thing, a body with an ego that's going to be around and has lasting permanence, then it's very hard to think about death, because something real and permanent and substantial has been removed. But if we think about the fact that we change constantly, that it's a very flickering thing, that we came out of something karmically and we don't know where we come from, and that there will be another change and something else will happen, then it's not so much a cause for sorrow, because nothing is really dying. It's only our habit to think that something's dying. So that's why I think why he was laughing.
This habit of mind around ego.
Yeah. For you, they lost 5 people who they knew well. That's how you saw it, I think, who were friends and monks. And for them, it was like these friends and monks had, were there when they were there, and then when they weren't there anymore, it wasn't a cause for sorrow necessarily. And it is, it's such a culturally funny thing for people to react that way in America, because we would grieve for the person who passed, but I think it's quite a shock to see the actual Tibetan Buddhist practice of, and in Japan too, the same thing of saying, well, people die, and we grieve for him, and then we go home. Change continues to occur.
I realized that I need 1,000 years.
Just a quick one. Could it be that their grief reaction was just so very fast that they just moved through it really quickly? Because having been a grief counselor myself, I just don't see. It seems like a form of denial to completely overlook the feelings.
They don't overlook the feelings, actually.
So you're saying that the group reaction is just very quick. They just move through it really fast. To me, that's a different thing.
You know, when you meditate, you actually look what happens. Look at what happens in your body and mind. It happens like this. And it happens even faster than I'm snapping my fingers. It's just very, very, very fast. And a lot of meditation is getting to a point where you can see just how fast it's happening. And in seeing that, then you really begin to get that everything changes, and there's nothing really that's permanent. There's no permanent thing. And that's, I would say, you know, this is not impossible to do. You can do it. But in a lay life, it requires a high level of dedication and an awful lot of sitting and being around the teacher. So, I know, I'm not saying take it because I say it. I'm saying you really can't do it. But you sit and sit and sit. And you study and study and study. It really becomes the main focus of your life. So. Thank you.
Thank you. We're honored. If you can offer a blessing for us. Offer a blessing, a closing blessing for us.
Offering of merit.
Offering of merits.
May this group, which is joined together in the Dharma, steadily increase in mindfulness, compassion, and equanimity for the benefit of all sentient beings. We offer this practice.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.